So now we have learned how to secure our Laravel applications, how to validate user input, how to communicate with databases, and how to respond to the user. And thanks to modern computing, these things take no time. The user sends a request and he almost immediately receives a response. But not every request is the same. Sometimes requests need a lot of time in order for everything inside the request to finish. Think about sending a database query that touches millions of records. This query is going to take time. Or think about communicating with a third-party service that you have no control over. This service, if it's slow, the response from it will take time, so the task will take a lot of time and the user will have to wait. But in most cases, you don't have to let the user wait until the task or all the tasks inside the request to finish completely before you respond to them. In these cases, it's better that you send these heavy tasks or slow tasks to the background and respond to the user immediately. Handling tasks in the background is called asynchronous task execution. It's very complicated and requires a lot of work, unless you are using the Laravel framework. Laravel makes it easy, and as it ships a component called the queue component with every fresh Laravel application. All you need to do is to define heavy tasks, configure the queue component, and let Laravel hands these tasks to the background so you can respond to the user immediately. Let me show you. We'll start by simulating a heavy task by using PHP's sleep function. We'll add sleep 5 here before returning the welcome view in the main route. The sleep function will let the PHP runtime wait for 5 seconds before continue executing our code. Now, if we visit localhost, we will see that the browser is loading for 5 full seconds before responding. So instead of having the user wait, let's send this sleeping task to the background. And to do that, we are going to go to our terminal and create our first job. A job is Laravel's term for a background task. So let's go to the terminal and call sail artisan make job. We will call our job slow job. Hit enter, and the job was created successfully. Now if we go back to PHP Storm and check under app jobs directory, we can see the job that we just created. A job class has a constructor and a handle method. Whatever code you add inside the handle method is going to be executed in the background when the job runs. So let's move our sleep function to the handle method of the job. So we'll go back to our route and then copy the sleep function from here and put it inside the handle method. So instead of running the heavy or slow work here, we are going to run it inside the job. And inside the route, we are going to dispatch this job. So we'll call slow job and then call dispatch. Perfect. Now our job is defined. It's time that we configure the queue component. And the queue configuration are kept under the queue.php configuration file that you can find under the config directory. Inside this file, you can find several queue connections that you can use. Each connection has a driver, which is basically the storage driver Laravel will use to store the jobs that you dispatch until they are processed in the background. And Laravel supports the database driver, the beanstalk driver, the SQS driver, and the Redis driver. Let's start by using the database driver in this example application. So let's head over to the Laravel documentation under the queue component and check the driver prerequisites for the database driver. And we can see here that we need to create a migration and run the migration for Laravel to create the jobs table inside our database. And since we are running sail, we are going to call sail artisan queue table instead of PHP artisan queue table. So let's go to the terminal and call sail artisan queue table. And now that the migration was created successfully, let's call sail artisan migrate. And now let's go back to PHP Storm and go to the env file to configure our environment. What we want to do is to update the queue connection from the sync connection to the database connection. The sync connection here basically executes the task immediately instead of dispatching it to the queue. This can be useful for use during local development. But in our example, we are going to use the database connection. And now that our queue is configured, let's visit localhost and see what happens. So if we go to the browser and refresh localhost, we can see that it responded immediately. It didn't execute the sleep function that's inside the sleeping job handle method. Now let's check the jobs table to see our job there. We will go to the terminal and call say MySQL to open a connection to the MySQL server, and then run select all from jobs. And here we go, we can see that we have a job stored in the database. Let's have a more tidy version of this output, and to do that we are going to use the sail tinker command and then run db table jobs and get the first jobs or the first job in the table. And here we go. This is the record for the job that we just dispatched. It has an ID of 1 and it was sent to the default queue, that's the payload of the job, and several other attributes that Laravel needs to store. And the way it works is that Laravel is going to send this job to the queue store that you choose and then keeps it there. After that we are going to start several queue workers, and the job of these workers is to check the queue store, keep checking the queue store until it finds a job to process, and then it will get the job, process it, and then delete it from the queue store. Workers execute jobs in a first in first out manner, and that means all the jobs will be executed first before the jobs that are more recent. And to start a worker, all we need to do is call the artisan queue work command. So let's do that. Now we'll clear the terminal and call sail artisan queue work. This command will not exit or finish, it will just keep running and checking for jobs to process. And as we can see, it picked up the job that we just dispatched and was able to process it. If we check the queue store now, we will find that it's empty because the job was processed. So let's go again and check and call sail MySQL to open a MySQL connection, and then call select all from jobs. Hit enter and we can see that the table is now empty. Now let's clear the terminal and call sail artisan queue work again, and the command will just sit there because there are no jobs in the queue. But if we go to localhost to visit the route that dispatches the job, let's do that right now. And then we refresh and then go back to the terminal. We can see that it was able to pick the job that we just dispatched and is trying to process it immediately. But what if we want to delay job processing for a bit? We don't want the worker to process it immediately after it is dispatched to the queue. And to do that, we can use the delay function. So let's stop this worker and get back to PHP store and go to the route where we dispatched the job, and then chain the delay method, and let's say we are going to delay this job for 5 seconds. Now if we dispatch this job, the worker will wait 5 seconds before it starts processing it. So let's try that. We will go to the terminal and call sail artisan queue work again, and then head over to Chrome and refresh. Now the job is dispatched, but the worker is waiting for 5 seconds before it starts picking it up again. And now you see how powerful the queue component is in Laravel, and you may think that dispatching jobs to the queue is a fire and forget kind of thing, but that's not true. Things may fail for several reasons, and you need to tell Laravel exactly what to do in the case of failure. First, Laravel lets you configure the number of attempts that you allow the job to be retried. So Laravel will retry this job if it fails for this number or this amount of time. And also you can configure Laravel to execute a specific block of code if the job executes or it finishes all the attempts and it's still failing. Let me show you how to do that. Now let's go to our job class inside PHP Storm and throw an exception instead of sleeping. So throw new exception, and the exception message will be just failed. Now let's go to the terminal and start a worker, then go to Chrome and refresh to dispatch the job again. And we can see that the worker picked this job up and it failed to execute. Now let's configure this job to be retried for 3 times. And we do that inside the job class. We need to define a tries property. So public tries equals 3. Let's go to the route here and remove this delay as we don't need to show it anymore. And then we will go to the terminal, start a worker, and then go to Chrome to refresh to dispatch the job. And we can see now that the job was retried 3 times before it was considered a failure. Let's now write some code for Laravel to execute whenever this job fails. And to do that, we will need to implement a failed method on the job class. So inside the job class, we are going to add a failed method. So failed. This method accepts one argument, which is the exception that was thrown. So we will type in this to throwable and call the variable e, which stands for exception. And inside this method, we'll just log a line to the log file. So info, this job has failed. Now let's open the log file, which is located under storage logs laravel.log. And then we go to the terminal, start a worker, and finally we go to Chrome to dispatch the job. And we can see that the job was attempted 3 times and then it was finally failed. Now let's go to PHP Storm and we can see that the first attempt throw an exception, the second attempt throw an exception, the third attempt throw an exception, and then finally, before marking the job as complete failure, Laravel executed the failed method, which printed this job has failed inside the log file. And as you can see, the queue component in Laravel is very powerful. It gives you tons of configurations so you can tell the framework how to dispatch a job, how to process it, how to handle failure, and how to handle success. Honestly, this is my most favorite component in the entire framework with all its great components. And if you want to learn more about the queue component, head over to the official documentation on laravel.com to find everything about the configurations that you can use and about the details of how things work under the hood. I will see you on the next video.